Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear viewers, this is an introduction to Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, which is my journey through life as I became Muslim and after I became Muslim, and some of the events which occurred to me as I passed through the phases of my life. My wife was instrumental in bringing me to Islam, and also as a partner for 41 years in my life and my experiences. Unfortunately, she passed away about 3 weeks ago on the 30th of May, and it'd be a big loss because she was a big help, as we shall see in the following episodes, inshallah. So let me talk a little bit about myself and explain who I am and basically where I came from. I'm an Englishman. I was born in 1938. I was the youngest of 8 children. I have a twin brother, and we were raised as Anglicans. But at the age of 20, I was called up for national service, and I came back from national service. I was still practicing Christianity. I had been a choir boy. I would have been an altar boy, but I was still going to church regularly on a Sunday, both in the morning and in the evening. But gradually doubts came into my mind, and I began to question what it was that I believed in. And the belief system that I had, I asked the vicar. He was like the church dignitary who leads the prayers and talks to the congregation and is the spiritual leader of the so-called flock people. And I asked him various questions, and his answers to me weren't satisfactory. Basically, he said, "You just have to believe, my son," which is not a real answer, and it certainly wasn't satisfactory. So I began to question more and more and more, and doubts came into my mind as to what I actually did believe. So much so that when we turned to face the altar to say the creed, the statement of faith, I found that I was questioning it and saying, "You don't really believe this. Why are you doing it?" And then in the 1960s, there was a social upheaval in the country, and I realized that the church wasn't answering the problems in society. And then, feeling I was a hypocrite going to church, I stopped going to church on the basis that I wouldn't find God in the church, and that the church wasn't answering the problems which are coming up in the society. And so I gave up organized religion. But that didn't mean that I gave up belief in God. I didn't. I kept that. But I had to find God now. And I gave myself a code where I said that really I want to tell the truth. I would like to help people less fortunate than myself wherever possible. And I would not take advantage of certain situations I might find myself in. Now, that was the personal code that I gave myself, and I went through life on that basis. I was then about 23 years old, and the people I came in contact with, I used to ask them, "What is your belief system, and what do you get out of it? What does it do for you?" And I came in contact with Buddhists, with Hindus, with Jews, with Catholics, I guess 1 or 2 other religions that I don't really remember. And I read various articles, books on Hinduism, Shintoism, Confucianism, Taoism, and the philosophy of my day was Swedenborgianism. But for various reasons, none of these really appealed to me, with the result that ultimately I didn't practice any of them, and I just kept my own code. Now, I was working in various research establishments, and I went to another one, and there I moved into a senior hostel, and in the hostel there were students from Pakistan, Iran, India, as well as from the UK, and they were PhD students in general, and the younger group used to get together, and as one does in these sort of circles, we argue politics or religion, and that's what we used to do. And one day someone explained the meaning of prayer with respect to Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran, and Hadith Qudsi, where the Fatiha is actually a dialogue between the worshipper and the worshipped. And that had an impact on me. And so I went along to the Information Bureau in the city nearest to me, which was Oxford, and I said to them, have you got any information on Islam, or is there a mosque in Oxford? They said, we've got no information and we don't know of a mosque in Oxford, but we can give you the name of someone who may be able to help you. So I went and, I phoned this guy up, and out of that came that we would arrange to meet 2 evenings a week. The first thing I told him was that I don't know that I can be a Muslim, but with no information I shall never find out. He said, it's my duty and my obligation to tell you what I can and to find out for you what I don't know. So I used to go to his house 2 evenings a week. We used to try to discuss Islam. Mainly it was just a series of questions from me to start with, because I didn't know anything about Islam. And he turned out to be an Englishman who had embraced Islam 20 years earlier, and he was in fact the Imam of the mosque. So I had a pretty good teacher in that sense, okay? And after some 6 months, I was following him in the prayer and actually learning to pray myself and practicing Islam as best I could on the bit that I knew. And this went on for some 18 months. Now, there wasn't much of an Islamic community where I was. I had to go 12 miles to the mosque. I had to go 12 miles to find a Muslim family. And the people that I met, Muslims, were all in the mosque. And I started to go to Quran al-Karim on a Thursday evening, and Jummah on a Friday when I could. I'd changed to shift work now and working on computers. And after about 18 months, some people said to me, have you said the Shahada? And I said no. And they said, why not? And my comment was, do you think I know enough? And of course they laughed and they said, come on. So I said the Shahada, and that was 18 months after I had first got interested in Islam. But by then I was practicing what I knew. I'd learnt to pray, and I was fasting, giving charity and zakat and so on. So, alhamdulillah, I now said the Shahada, and now I was a member of this community. And they said, we can't call you David, we'll call you Daud, which is just the Arabic form of David. So that was convenient. My family more or less accepted what I'd done. We'd been brought up to believe that we should do what we believe in. So if it was all right for me, that was all right with them. But it wasn't all right for them to become Muslim, and they wouldn't, and they didn't, okay? None of them. So that was the introduction. I had 4 brothers and 3 sisters at that time, and gradually some of them passed away, but none of them ever became Muslim, and none of them were ever really interested in Islam. So that's another story about that, which I'll come to later in another episode perhaps, inshallah. So this is essentially the background, and I was now committed to going to the mosque, and we'll talk about what happens afterwards, inshallah, and we'll have a break now and come back in a short while, so keep watching. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. In this part, we're going to try and focus on what are the benefits of my journey to Islam. What can we understand from it, and what material can we derive from it? In the first place, of course, there was a change, and that change has a big impact. The effect on my family was not as traumatic as it might have been, because we had been brought up to do what we believed in. And so if one understands that, then, and that respects it, then if you do what you believe in, other people will accept and respect that as well. And this was true for my family. If it's all right for you, then go ahead and do it, okay? But it's not all right for us. So that was the sort of approach that was being used, and this was the situation in the family. The next thing was, of course, that the various things happen, like dietary habits. Okay, I have to change some of the things that I was eating or not eating, as the case may be, and certainly drinking. Okay, I wasn't a heavy drinker, so that wasn't a problem. Okay, and I gave up alcohol very easily. Okay, now the food again wasn't a problem really, because there's enough variety without having to have a particular product which you feel you can't do without. But there were interesting asides. For instance, in the 1960s and 70s, until the common market started in Europe, the ingredients in certain products were not labelled. And when I used to go to the bakers and talk to the master bakers, pig fat was used in all bread. So this was a problem. But a lot of people didn't realise that, for instance. I used to go to supermarkets, I used to phone up the master bakers, and so on and so forth. But wherever I went, I was told that you will not get bread without pig fat. Of course, now you can, apparently, and that's a benefit. But it all came because of having to label products through the Common Market Initiative. So that was another change. When I used to go home, and there was to my family's homes, or brothers and sisters' homes, there was also the question of Ramadan and fasting and the impact on them. If you turn up at someone's house and they say, have a cup of tea, you say, well, I can't actually eat until about 10 o'clock at night because I'm fasting. It's not exactly a social function, is it? So there were these sort of minor problems, but of course we overcame these. Now, in terms of what else we can get out of it, there's the discipline that comes with the 5 times prayers. There's the caring and sharing that comes with charity, zakat, and so on. And there's a recognition that some people are not quite as well off as others, and that you do intend to try to do something about it, although in a small way. So all these things were a factor, and this is where, if you like, I actually empathized with the Islamic values, because I'd said that the code I gave myself was trying to help others, less fortunate than myself, and telling the truth. And these are 2, if you like, major Islamic values. And there I was already practicing these without Islam, or without knowing about Islam. So this was quite informative, but it was also not such a big change in my lifestyle. So, as I just said, the dietary requirements, they weren't a problem. I used to play squash, and after playing squash we used to meet in a pub and have a drink or some sandwiches. Well, I couldn't eat the sandwiches and I couldn't drink alcohol, so I just used to have lemonade or something. So that wasn't a problem either. But in other places it becomes noticeable, but not really an issue. So, you know, you turn up somewhere and they've got something, you say, no, I can't eat that, or I can't eat this, but they will find something that you can eat. So this actually settled down quite well, really, and I didn't have any problems in becoming a Muslim. In terms of what happened in my workplace, I didn't have a problem there, because my boss said, Daud, if you need to pray, you share an office, you can use my office. And his boss said, if you want to pray, Daud, and you share an office, make an arrangement with my secretary when I'm not here and use my office. So I didn't have a problem. But this is educated circles, and in educated circles you don't normally have a problem with religion, because people understand. They may not always respect, but they do understand. Whereas in uneducated circles, people don't only not understand, but in general they don't want to understand. And that becomes a bit of a problem sometimes. So anyway, in the circles I moved in, I didn't have a problem, alhamdulillah. And that was a benefit. And it meant that all I did was I changed my name legally by deed poll, my first name. You didn't have to do it legally, but I did. And I pinned a notice of that deed poll on the notice board in the offices where I worked, so that people knew that I didn't want to be called David, I wanted to be called Daud. But I didn't have to explain it to everyone. So that was the other issue. And the question is sometimes, do we have to change our name? And some people seem to have a misunderstanding about this, because it's not necessary to change a name unless it has some sort of connotation which is un-Islamic. If it doesn't have that connotation, then the name doesn't have to be changed at all. And certainly there's no need to change the family name, your father's name. So this is another issue that wasn't a problem. So some of my family still call me David, and the rest of them call me Daud. So some accepted it, some didn't. But then they knew me as David, and they kept knowing me as David. So again, I don't have a problem with that. Okay, some people might, but I didn't. But I respect the point of view that if you want to be identified as a Muslim, then how can you keep the name David? So if you want to integrate into the Muslim society, you need to change your name to a Muslim name, really. And that's the sort of benefit that you have. If you walk into a mosque and someone says, "What's your name?" and you say David, we're not going to welcome you as a Muslim brother just like that. But if you say your name is Daud, then they will. And I experienced this many, many places all over the world, alhamdulillah. So, are there any other benefits that I can think of? I mentioned dietary. I haven't mentioned fasting. Fasting is a benefit, of course, because this is basically a 1-month course on detox. Fasting is another benefit, and in this case, there is a discipline, but there's also like a 1-month course for detox. And this takes the toxins out of the body and actually is very beneficial for health. And a lot of people will advocate this nowadays. And of course, this is something that is in terms of society. Most people want to get rid of the build-up of these toxins in their body, and here we have a 1-month course of fasting which will help to do this, and the discipline should be there, and the benefits are obvious, and you can look up the medical benefits of fasting if one's really interested, alhamdulillah. So we've come to the end of this session, and I'd like to ask you to come back for another episode, and to be shown soon, inshallah. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.